Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my book review of the book Dark Force Rising, the second book in the original Thrawn Trilogy from the Legends EU timeline for Star Wars, written by Timothy Zahn. If you're unaware, I have been reading the old Thrawn Trilogy. I've actually been rereading it because of the Ahsoka show. I explain in my review of the first book, Heir to the Empire, all the reasons that I'm reviewing it and my history with the books, that I read them back in 2016 after they announced that Thrawn was going to be in Rebels, which was just a really cool announcement, and I had no idea who he was, so I picked up the books and loved them and read them and haven't read them since. So this is the first time in like 7 years I've read them. I know there are other people who can be like, I read them back in 91, but this is the first time in 7 years I've read them. So I wanted to pick them up and reread them. And specifically I did this, and I just realized recently that the reasoning is because they didn't do a journey to Ahsoka like they did the movies. Like they had Journey to The Force Awakens, Journey to The Last Jedi, Journey to The Rise of Skywalker. And even though Rogue One and Solo didn't have a Journey to series, they basically had books that were like leading up to or came out right after the movies. Like they had books that were tie-in material. We haven't gotten that at all for the Mandoverse, specifically for Ahsoka, which is my most anticipated part of the Mandoverse. So because of that, I decided to make my own. So as part of that, I'm reading Dark Force Rising and the whole Thrawn trilogy. And to sum up, I thought the first book was fantastic, amazing, relied a little bit too heavily on the OG lines from the OG movies, but it's still, the characters felt really good. And the weakest part, if there is a weakest part, was Leia's characterization. In this one, the weakest part was Leia, but not her characterization. Her characterization was fine in this book. The problem with Leia is the plot line. The weakest part of this book is the Nagri Honegger plot line. Basically, you realize at the end of the previous book that Leia has to go and help the Nagri people because they have a connection to Vader and she wants to help them out. And that is like the slowest part of the book, and that's the only real problem I have, is that it slowed down the narrative too much, it lasted too long, and it just didn't feel exciting enough compared to the others. You know, compared to other plot lines from other Star Wars books, it's just fine. You know, I've read some pretty boring Star Wars books and other books before, so it's not like it's the most terrible plot line, but when you compare it to all the other plot lines that are happening in this book and the other Timothy Zahn books, it's just not that strong. So I thought that the inaugural plotline was weak, but that's all my negative. Let's go to the positive. The action sequence at the end of this book is superb. The Han plotline in this book is great, and Mara Jade has a great character arc here. I talked about how Talon Karrde was my standout character from the first book. Mara Jade is my standout character in this book, so I really enjoyed it. And I could get into more spoiler-free, but I'm going to go ahead and turn it into spoilers, so if you've not read Dark Force Rising, be forewarned, I'm going to get into spoilers now, but it's an old book, and it's one of the ultimate Star Wars books, part of the trilogy. If you're going to read Star Wars, everyone recommends you start here. Just about everyone. So, getting into spoilers of the book, you've been warned. I can't believe they murdered everyone! Just kidding. So, the Dark Force Rising, in this book, you have the Mara Jade plotline that she kind of is unsure of some things, and she's like kind of thinking about joining Thrawn, not joining Thrawn. She's thinking about betraying Talon Karrde or helping Talon Karrde, and she ends up getting in a bit of a mess. And so she has to go to the one person she does not want to see, because that's the one person who can help her, which is Luke, which is just delightful to read. That was so much fun, and it really paves the way for her storyline in The Last Command and in later Star Wars books to see where she goes. So I really enjoyed that. Her going to try to confront Sabaoth, and that being the thing that basically convinces Luke, yeah, Sabaoth is nuts and he's not a good Jedi. I really enjoyed that sequence in the book. My favorite overall plotline was Han's plotline. He's trying to find the Katana fleet, which is just a great concept. The idea that there's this fleet that's just jumped into hyperspace, you don't know where they are, and Hans and Lando with him are trying to go find information on it, and as a result, they end up not finding the Katana fleet at first, but instead finding an old senator who used to be part of the rebellion and has not been for a while. And that senator is Garm Bel Iblis. And of course, I remember Garm Bel Iblis from the first time I read these books, but his introduction is so much fun. He's such an interesting character because he's someone who really cares about the rebellion, but he also has a pride to him, and he does not want to hurt his ego by begging to be let back into the rebellion and things like that. So I thought that was a really he's a really fascinating character, and his whole group, the idea that he's been kind of jumping around for a while trying to protect his little small force that he was able to muster together. And it's interesting how this book actually ties into a book that would come out years later with The Force Unleashed, which also has a Garm Bel Iblis tie-in, and talks about the formation of the rebellion. In this book, when Han is trying to convince Iblis, hey, you could join our crew, and he ends up having to go through some hoops with some of Iblis's crew, all that stuff was really engaging. Of course, Thrawn, I think this is probably the least Thrawn is used in the trilogy, but Thrawn is used pretty well. He, again, has the perfect element of he strikes fear into people, but that's not his primary thing. Thrawn is very calculating, and people are loyal to him because he's smart and he's doing things well. And you feel like, okay, this is someone who he freaks me out, but he's awesome. And Thrawn does some things in here that are really to prove Thrawn is a villain. Even though in the canon there's some moments where, especially in the new Thrawn trilogy, that they portray him as a hero, but in this book and in Heir to the Empire, you see some moments of him being villainous. Like, he is the antagonist at minimum. He is an antagonist. He's not pure evil like Vader or the Emperor, but he's an antagonist. I also loved the idea that Niles Ferrier was talking to them, and he lets slip that it's Thrawn, and it's like, Han's like, we got the information, good, we don't even need to trade anything, you just gave away the store. I thought that was pretty funny. And then my favorite sequence of the book was the ending sequence. The entire ending sequence, starting with Phalia arguing with Leia and with Card and with the rest of the council about the stuff. Like, Phalia is one of those guys, you hate him, but he's so interesting because he creates a visceral reaction out of the audience. I just wanted to punch Phalia. But that's a good thing, because that means I really care about my characters, the characters in the book, and I want Phalia to lose against them. And so Phalia just made me so angry in a good way. And when he's like threatening to put everyone under arrest, and he's just doing whatever takes for political purposes, I think that it seems a little bit convenient that Phalia slips up when he does, and that they just put it, like, kind of blast out to all his crew, his unfeeling nature towards them. That was not smart on his part, and usually Phalia is pretty smart. So that seemed a little weird, but still, it needed to happen. And then finding the Katana fleet, but it's only like 15 ships out of 200, and it turns out Thrawn's already got the rest of them. And then they have the big battle with the Star Destroyers, and all hope seems lost. And who shows up? Garm Bel Iblis. And Garm Bel Iblis is like, hey, you called me, right? And Leia's like, no. And he's like, oh. And she's like, well, we'll take it. We'll take it. That was just so much fun. And I'm not a big space battle person. I don't like having to visualize them. I like them, in the movies, but it's hard for me to visualize space battles. But in this book, I think this is some of the most engaging space battle work that I've read, especially in the last 2 chapters. Well, 2.5 chapters. So it's super entertaining. And then, of course, you get to the really big spoiler at the end of the book, that what is it being used? Cloning, that the Empire is cloning clones. Now, it seems a bit ridiculous that they can clone clones within only a matter of months. Like, I guess I'm so used to the prequels and that version of cloning that I'm like, hey, it takes like decades, at least a decade to do so. But apparently with using the Sparty cylinders, they can make clones in only like a month. That seems a little weird, but I'll go with it because these books were written before the prequels, so they didn't know how cloning worked. Maybe you could make a clone in a day, so they say it takes a couple months. So that's the reason that there's been the stuff on Mount Tantus and stuff on Wayland, and it was all perfectly foreshadowed in the first book that I really liked. So I really enjoyed that. It was also both entertaining and a little bit, unrealistic that they're running through the ship in the middle of the book when Luke and Mara go to save Card and his crew, and then they're like, oh wait, that's the Millennium Falcon. Oh, well, we'll just take that to get out of here. I was like, what are the odds that ship, that Star Destroyer captured the Millennium Falcon, and that they happened to come across it at that time, and that they're able to use it for their escape? Like, it just seems a little bit convenient, as they would say, but it's still really fun, and it's a cool move. Like, I could imagine hearing the music from Star Wars playing that scene, music that was played in maybe like Force Awakens or something. So those are my thoughts on Dark Force Rising, the second book in the Thrawn Trilogy, the second book in my Journey to Ahsoka series for the YouTube channel. Are you excited about Ahsoka? Are you excited about reading these books? If you've read them, what do you think? I think this is the weakest of the three books, in my opinion, but I still give it a 9 out of 10. That shows how strong this book is. That being the weakest of a trilogy, it's still a 9 out of 10. Despite my problems with it, it's a delight to go through these books. I mean, that's just, there's no other word for it. It's a delight, and I'm having so much fun. So if you've read this, let me know your thoughts. If you're excited for Ahsoka, let me know those as well. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.